Okay, well, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us for another week, another virtual field trip. Hope you've had some time to get out a little bit this week. I know it's been chilly, but the birds are singing. There are so many that are passing through or have returned. So I hope you've gotten out to see some. We have a wonderful field trip for you today, all about the Kittatinny Ridge conservation landscape, the landscape itself, and the birds that are migrating along it both right now and at other times of the year. We have two special guests with us today. Jeanne Ortiz from Audubon, Pennsylvania. She's the Senior Program Manager in Landscape Conservation, and she manages our work on the Kittatinny Ridge, among other things that she'll tell you about. And Katie Loucks, she's the program associate with our Healthy Forests Initiative. So she's working a lot in our northern and western forests, doing incredible work that I'm sure they'll both tell you about in just a little bit. But before we get started, just a quick update on what we have coming up. Today we have our migration field trip along the Kittatinny Ridge. May 20th, Eli DePaulis will be joining us from Appalachian Audubon Society to take you on a field trip through their Trout Run Nature Preserve, which they own and manage for conservation. May 27th, we're going to take a little break, but look for an invitation in June. We've got two field trips that are in the works, one on the Allegheny Front Hawk Watch, and the other on some coastal areas up in the Presque Isle region. If you are looking for a schedule of the event, schedule of the upcoming field trips and the registration links, there's the link on your screen, pa.audubon.org/events. If you've missed any or you want to share any with anyone, that second link will take you to recordings of all of the field trips that have already happened. Today's field trip will also be recorded, and you can see it up on the site probably in about a day or so. Just a couple reminders for Zoom. Microphones have all been muted. If you've somehow managed to turn yours back on, if you could turn it off, that'd be great. Just keeps the competition to a minimum for Jeanne and Katie. Chat box at the bottom of your screen is a great way to ask questions. Katie and Jeanne are going to be monitoring that throughout the presentation today. So if you think of anything while they're talking, feel free to ask it right as we go. You can turn off, especially if you're having a little trouble with your internet connection, if you turn off your computer's camera in the bottom left-hand corner of the screen, that'll save you some bandwidth and help your connection out a little bit. You won't lose the presentation, it'll just take your personal camera off. And then when we get to the end, we'll save some time for some questions and answers with Jeanne and Katie. As always, if your chapter is interested in hosting a field trip, we'd love to have you. Like I said, we have two that are kind of in the chute. They're almost ready to go, but we'd love to have more. So my email is there on the screen. Just shoot me your ideas and we'll go from there. One last thing we wanted to share with you today. The Endangered Species Coalition is working on educating PA state legislators about wildlife corridors. There is a House resolution that's coming up, and today is their call-in day of action. So if you feel so inclined to talk to your PA state legislator, whether you talk to their staff or you leave a message, we'd love it if you share your voice and your thoughts on connecting wild spaces. You can talk about how wildlife corridors preserve habitat and help restore habitat, making that connectivity a little easier. They make the landscapes more resilient, improve our biodiversity by having habitats that are much more connected and much more able to support a wide variety of species. And it's a proactive way to support, and you can see right there on your screen, our vulnerable plants and animals while also protecting our state's $4 billion outdoor recreation industry. So if you would like to be a part of that, they're trying to get at least 50 calls today. You can see the link on the bottom corner of your screen. It's that bit.ly. It's just an easy way to shorten links that are otherwise very, very long. So have a look at that. And if you can give your PA state legislator a call, that would be fantastic. But without any more ado, I'm going to pass it over to Jeanne Ortiz and Katie Loucks, both from Audubon, Pennsylvania, for our migratory field trip along the Kittatinny Ridge. Jeanne.
All right. Thank you, Kelly. Thank you, everyone, for joining us, and thank you for featuring the Kittatinny Ridge today. It is a great example of how important connectivity is. The Kittatinny Ridge Conservation Landscape is funded by the Pennsylvania Department of Conservation and Natural Resources, DCNR. The primary partners on the project, aside from DCNR, are Audubon, the Appalachian Trail Conservancy, and the Nature Conservancy. And also along the entire extent of the Kittatinny Ridge, we work with local, state, county, and federal government, nonprofits, land trusts, colleges, and universities. So there are many, many partners working up and down the ridge to conserve it. This is a map of conservation landscapes in Pennsylvania. There are 8. The Kittatinny Ridge was designated a Pennsylvania conservation landscape by DCNR in 2018. And speaking of connectivity, if you look at the map, the Kittatinny Ridge is shown in that gray-black color. And it runs for 185 miles and it connects 5 other conservation landscapes. A conservation landscape has strong natural assets, local readiness and buy-in for conservation, and state-level investment and support, as you can see, as DCNR is supporting all of these conservation landscapes. We work to motivate citizens and elected officials to engage in land use planning, investment, civic engagement, and revitalization. This is a map of the Kittatinny Ridge shown in the yellow hash marks, going from, in the upper right-hand corner, the Delaware Water Gap, down to the Maryland line. Along the spine of the Kittatinny Ridge is the Appalachian Trail. We have 160 miles of the Appalachian Trail in Pennsylvania. It is shown in the blue hash mark. Again, starting in the upper right-hand corner, the blue hash mark, going down the extent of the Kittatinny until you get to about Carlisle. And then the AT heads south along South Mountain. And then onward west is the Tuscarora Trail. This map also shows that within proximity of the Kittatinny Ridge are many major metropolitan areas. And the Kittatinny is a major water resource for all of the people down below the ridge.
Where did it
Kittatinny
go?
Ridge. The Kittatinny is also a global important bird area for the Trillium Warbler. And Katie will talk in a minute about the cerulean. But the Kittatinny is a premier migration corridor, and the cerulean is on a list of species of global conservation concern. The ridge is also a continental important bird area for the bald eagle. And now I'm going to turn it over to Katie to have all kinds of fun talking to us about birds.
Hi, I just want to thank Kelly for arranging this, and I'm really glad that all of you are on to take this field trip with me. We're going to start basically in the woodlands, like what's behind me right now, so we can pretend like we're there. But there's mainly 3 categories of birds or suite of birds that we tend to look at on the ridge, which are the forest-dwelling birds, more open grassland type species, and riparian birds. Now, just because a species is a forest bird doesn't mean it's not a riparian bird too, so there's some overlap between the different groups, but I tried to break them down so you can determine what habitat you are on and the likelihood of seeing the species we're going to talk about today. Okay, Kelly. So the first bird that we're going to see is the Scarlet Tanager, and it's going to be in the deep, dense forest areas. It really likes mature forests that are unfragmented, so very large wood tracts it does the best in. It's pretty easy to recognize because it's bright red, it's so vibrant, but the tough part about spotting this species is it's up in the canopy pretty much most of the time. So this is a species that you're probably going to be better off listening for. So I put on here, hopefully it works, some songs so you can kind of listen for the species. That's good, Kelly. And I'll explain what you're hearing. So it kind of sounds like a raspy robin, and sometimes even as experienced as I am as a birder, I kind of mix it up and I don't listen to it or don't hear it. But the thing I usually pinpoint is that very quick chick purr that it usually does at the beginning of the song, or it will even do that on its own. So if you hear something singing chick purr, that's probably a Scarlet Tanager, and you can try to locate it with your binoculars after that. It's the easiest way to find it. Also, we wanted to point out that the female is not that bright red. It's more of a dullish yellow color. So you might be looking at a female and not even realizing it's a tanager. So keep your eye out for her. It mainly eats insects. So it's not going to be really at your feeder anytime soon. And it's going to try to stay in those mixed deciduous woodlands. The ridge is really important to the tanager because, and I just kind of learned this the other day, it holds 17% of the breeding tanagers, which is a huge number. And even though the tanager has been declining over the last 50 years, about 1% a year, Pennsylvania, it's pretty stable. So we really support conservation for the tanager to keep Pennsylvania a stronghold for it. We work with partners like the DCNR and the Forest Bureau to incorporate management plans for the tanager. All right. Next species that we will see in the deep forest is the Trillium Warbler. Now, the Trillium Warbler and the tanager, both neotropic songbirds that migrate very long distance, they have similar habitats, but they vary on the tree density that are needed. So where a tanager needs closed canopy, the Trillium really likes to have canopy gaps within the forest setting. So very large trees with openings in between caused by insect damage or the ash dying off. That makes great habitat for Trillium Warbler. It just has to have a very dense understory. So sometimes seeing them is kind of hard because you're already in a dense woodland with a lot of understory, but also it's another species that's hanging out really high up in the canopy usually. So if you happen to see this blue bird, you're really lucky. The female is very similar to the male. The difference is the female doesn't have the black necklace around its neck, and it's a little bit of a duller blue, but you're probably going to want to learn this song too if you want to see it, because just waiting for it to come down to your level is going to be very rare for that to happen. So I included a song with this one too. That's good. It's a tough song to learn too. It's not a very easy song to recognize. It's very buzzy and it kind of can just get lost in the background until you really tune into the Trillium Warbler. So the best thing to do if you're out looking for one, maybe listen to the song a couple of times before you go out, and then you might be able to hear it. Unfortunately, the Trillium Warbler is declining, as Jeanne said. It's a species of conservation need. So we actively manage for Trillium Warblers by doing creating canopy gaps within mature forests. Every partners like the NRCS, the DCNR, private landowners all get involved with creating the habitat for the warbler. It tends to be higher up on the ridge lines too, and on the slopes more so than in the bottomlands. And it's really declining just because of the lack of age structure in the forest. A lot of people quit cutting trees down in the forest, and we repress fire. So the canopy has closed into the point where it's not suitable habitat. And it has a lot of problem on the wintering grounds too. But with all these efforts, things are starting to turn around for the Trillium Warbler, so there's a lot of hope for them. Okay, next we have the wood thrush, which to many just see like a drab brownish red bird with a little bit of spots on its chest. It looks a little bloated. That's a good way to recognize it. It just has a big pot belly. It's going to be more on the forest floor. So good news is that you're going to be able to probably spot it even without the song. But the song is what makes the wood thrush the wood thrush. People recognize it pretty easily. It's a beautiful song. It's great to hear on early morning. Kelly, if you want to play that. it's very fluty and very lovely to hear, like most of the other thrushes. So you're gonna listen for that eole sound. You can also, oh, sorry, Kelly, sometimes I didn't even realize it was still going. So you're not only going to hear this in the forest, this is also really found a lot in suburban areas, just in little patches of woods. It can nest back there in your backyard. But the problem with that is nest success is very low in those type of areas. So it definitely needs a more dense forest to keep the nest from being taken over by predators, or nest parasitism from brown-headed cowbirds is a big issue in rural and more urban areas. They like to have a lot of leaf litter on the ground, a nice shrubby layer in the forest as well, because they'll nest in the shrubs. We also, this is a focal species for Audubon, so we include those in any type of management plan that we can get our hand on, whether it's a private landowner looking to improve their habitat, or on game lands and DCNR, we work with them to include wood thrush habitat needs in any type of forest management plan going forward. Okay, and then next we got a sharp-shinned hawk. This bird, I think hawks in general are sometimes very hard to identify, but sharp-shinned hawks to me are very, very difficult to ID because they look so much like the Cooper's hawk at some points. The female is about the size of a male Cooper's hawk. So the female sharp-shin is slightly larger than the male. So it puts it at the same size as a male's Cooper's, and there's all kinds of confusion, and you can watch a ton of funny videos of people trying to figure out if it's a Cooper hawk or a sharp-shinned hawk. A good indicator, if you get a good look at it, the difference is usually I try to look at the tail, because the tail is more square than a Cooper's hawk. It has a very long tail, so that makes it really great at navigating through the forest land with quick bursts of speed. It's very agile, and the tail acts like as a rotor and can navigate through dense underbrush. It really needs dense woods, and there's not really that much studies that have happened with the sharp-shinned hawk, but from what we know, it can be found in nesting in conifer trees or very dense deciduous trees. It really does not do well in fragmented areas, so those large tracts of forests are pretty important. It likes to eat other birds, so occasionally you will see it come down on your bird feeder. And like in this picture in bird bath, I've seen a couple sharp-shinned hawks take birds off my bird feeders. So that's when you're gonna see them in a residential area. They're about the size, another thing I wanted to say, they're about the size of a blue jay. So it's hard to like grasp the size of this bird when it's flying really fast through the woods. But if you think it's about the size of a blue jay or a very small crow, chances are it's probably a sharp-shinned hawk. And then for this guy, I'm going to change my background so we know where we're at now. So this is the blue-winged warbler. This is a species I've studied a whole lot, mainly because I've worked with golden-winged warblers for most of my career. So golden wings and blue-winged warblers go together very closely. The blue-wing likes forest, they just like young forest. So like behind me, you see this shrubby mess that nobody would want to walk through. Probably about 5 to 10 years after a clear cut. So you're gonna find them hanging out there on the lower elevation sides of the ridge. It's pretty easy to ID. It's bright yellow with that black mask, blue wings. It can get a little tricky, and I included the variations in the picture because they hybridize with the golden-winged warbler. So sometimes you may see a Lawrence or a rooster warbler. So you're usually just looking for that skinny mask or a yellow underpart. depending on the variation of the crossbreed. Also, since it's so shrubby, where it's at, it can be hard to see sometimes. So its song is so easy. It's one of the first warbler songs I memorized, and I always remembered it because it sounds like it's giving you a raspberry. And like, since it looks like a burglar, I always just thought it's a burglar giving you a raspberry after it stole all your stuff. So Kelly, that.
Can I just say, I will remember that description for the rest of this person. Forget.
You hear it?
I do.
All right. Sadly, the population with the blue wing is in decline. It's not as bad as the golden wing. So when we do habitat management, we consider both blue wing and golden wing at the same time. Early successional or young forest, what we call young forest habitat, is in a decline because farmlands have grown up into mature forest. And how we manage croplands now, it's just not suitable for golden wings and blue wings. Hopefully though, with all the work that's going on with the NRCS, Audubon, and our folks at the DCNR, we can start moving that trend in an upward position. So that's really all I got for the golden wing. You won't find that at your bird feeder too, because a lot of people tell me they see them at their bird feeder. They strictly eat insects.
Thank you, Katie.
Yep.
So the Kittatinny Ridge is part of the Atlantic Flyway. As we mentioned, it's a migration superhighway. It's largely forested, and it's a critical corridor for connectivity within and outside of Pennsylvania. And within Pennsylvania, it is also the most climate resilient landscape. Along the ridge, we have a number of hawk watches. You might have some favorites yourselves, but on this map, there are 18. So there are plenty of places to view birds along the Kittatinny Ridge. The ridge is facing threats. Some of these will be very familiar to you: residential development, commercial expansion, particularly these days, warehouses. Also energy production and transmission, for example, gas lines, invasive plant species, and the impacts of climate change. Katie, back to you.
Oh. Okay, so now we're looking at birds that are really threatened that the ridge supports. First is going to be the ruffed grouse, which is our state bird, so everybody should be familiar with it. It's just a brownish red ground bird, game bird, so not only do birders like it, hunters also like it, so there's a lot of support out there to help the ruffed grouse. It usually is nesting in young forest thickets like what's behind me, and like with a blue wing and golden wing warbler like as well, so you can manage for both species at the same time. You can also use burning as a type of management for the ruffed grouse, which is used a lot in aspen thickets and oak thickets. Can survive in rural areas with woodlots around farmlands, but then you're increasing predation from hawks, cats, and other predators. So it does a lot better when you have large tracts of woodlands like a lot of the ridge birds. It's facing multiple threats right now, including the habitat loss, but West Nile has been hitting it pretty hard, and depending on any given year, we can have declines of up to 75% because of West Nile, and that just happened last year. So when managers consider managing for the ruffed grouse, we're starting looking at ways of mitigating West Nile by not putting habitat near wetlands or place where mosquitoes like to breed, even as far as going as making sure when we create log roads into areas that we're smoothing them out so there isn't any type of pooling of water on the roads that mosquitoes can breed in to try to keep West Nile away from the grouse. It's a focal species of Audubon. So like I said, we're working with a lot of partners, including the Ruffed Grouse Society, the DCNR, the Game Commission, all to create habitat for this species, since so many people are invested in it. Hopefully this year, the population will do a little bit better with all the mitigation that we've been doing over the last year due to the decline. Okay. So this is one of my favorite species of hawks, and I basically begged Kelly to include it into this presentation because I think it doesn't get the attention it always deserves. This is the northern goshawk. You can see it's like a dark gray above with barred underparts, but what really makes it stand out usually is its long tail, it's the eyebrow on it, and its orange or red eye. It just looks like a fierce bird because it is a fierce bird. It's a very powerful hunter that bursts through woodlands to catch their prey from their perch, and its long tail and short wings allows it to navigate through dense woodlands pretty easily, surprising any type of prey it may come upon. And you're gonna know when you're by its nest because it is such a fierce protector of the nest. It will come after you, and it's really fun to watch videos of coworkers who've had to do surveys for these and just get bombarded by goshawks. They don't nest really on the ridge. They're more northern Pennsylvania, especially in the Allegheny National Forest, in mature conifers and mixed forests, large tracts of forest. Sometimes on open edges it will perch, but like I said, mainly within the forest you'll find it. It's shown to be declining in Pennsylvania, so it's another species of concern that we watch out for and manage for. People like falconers really love to use goshawks, so they help scientists to do surveys every year. And when it starts to decline, they really let us know, so we know that we do a little bit more management. It's a partial migrator, so this is why I include it in the presentation. So some of them will migrate, some of them won't. Usually the immature ones will migrate, and the mature species will stay on its breeding lands. And then in some years, if there's a big die-off of like hares, we'll have a big influx of migration. And that's when you'll really see it along the ridge line. It'll follow the ridge to different areas just because of the thermals that are there. But we're starting to learn a little bit more about the declines and its habitat needs. But since it's such a dense, it's like a deep, dense forest, more studies are definitely going to be needed for this bird. And then this is a back view of the broadwing hawk. It's another one of those species that I usually go by sound when I'm looking for, but it's pretty easy to point out in the woods too. It's a little bit smaller than a red-shouldered hawk, about crow size, has a short tail that has pronounced black and white stripes. So I usually just look for those when I'm looking at the broadwing hawk. Because it's pretty easy to ID when you hear it. I think I have a sound on here because nothing else makes the same sound as a broadwing hawk in my mind. You hear that really high-pitched whistle? That's the broadwing hawk. It's not very intimidating. It's just really high-pitched, and you'll hear it it echoes through the woods pretty well. Another species, it likes to nest in dense deciduous forest. Usually will stay under the canopy, but occasionally you can see it soaring above. For hunting, it likes the forest edge, marshlands. It will usually just be sitting on a perch looking for prey. Sorry, some of these songs are very long. The ridge is pretty important to the broadwing hawk because it's one of the hawks that migrate south every year in very large groups that we call kettles. since they're traveling so far, they really rely on those thermals that the ridge provides to conserve some energy. People will travel all over the place to come to places like the ridge just to see these large group migrations, because it doesn't, not every species does it, and it's a pretty amazing sight to see. And I think Jeanne will be talking more about the broadwing hawk and the studies going forward.
If any of you have a favorite hawk watch that you'd like to share, go ahead and throw it in the chat box for us.
So the Kittatinny Coalition, which manages the Kittatinny Ridge project, is doing a number of things to try to protect the ridge, and they're listed on the screen. I'm only going to touch upon 2 of them today: the conservation research and our return on environment municipal engagement work. But aside from that, we're completing a strategic plan for the Kittatinny Coalition. We'll wrap that up this year. We're also going to embark on a conservation plan, an updated conservation strategy for the ridge starting this year. We have a mini grant program that funds our partners' projects. We also are working hard to conserve land. The Nature Conservancy leads this effort with DCNR and land trusts up and down the ridge. And also we're working closely with the Appalachian Trail Conservancy to protect the Appalachian Trail. As an example of our research, Katie mentioned the broadwing hawk. We supported Hawk Mountain Sanctuary's broadwing hawk project for a few years. We tagged, sponsored, and named 3 birds: Kit, Regina, and Rosalie. And we were able to watch them migrate as Hawk Mountain studied them. They had tags, so we were able to just watch them all through the fall and winter, which was really fun. Some of the results of Hawk Mountain's work is, you can see it in the map on the left, how the broadwings migrated, where they migrated to. So for example, if you see Rosalie, she went down toward Bolivia, Peru. And then Regina, I have a picture of Regina up on the top, and Rosalie is sort of in the middle of your screen there.
I'm just going to leave this slide up for a couple more seconds so people have a minute to look at all of the transmitter lines. And that's just incredible.
It was really fun to sponsor, really fun to watch our birds migrate and come back. We'd get emails from Hawk Mountain about our birds being spotted, you know, coming back. It was a lot. It was really exciting.
All right, so we're coming out of the forest now and more in the open spaces, and we're going to see a couple different types of species out there. First, we have the golden eagle. I chose the golden eagle because I think we all pretty much have a good idea of what a bald eagle is, where you can see them, and they're much more common in Pennsylvania than the golden eagle. So I think when you see a golden eagle, you should be really excited, and you should know exactly what you're looking at so you can get excited. Very dark, large bird with a golden nape, feathers down its back, around its neck. I kind of can tell the difference between this and the bald eagle. There's a couple different ways you can tell the difference. An immature bald eagle, obviously a mature bald eagle is pretty easy to ID, but an immature bald eagle may look kind of like a golden eagle. So you're gonna wanna look for the long tail with a shorter head, a wingspan 6 to 7 feet. The immature golden eagle, or the mature golden eagles, have white patches at the base of the tail and the wings, and they kind of soar, glide a little bit different than the bald eagle. They have a slight V to them, and their wingtip feathers are spread like fingers. And Jeanne, if you go to the next slide, I believe I put a picture in there of what, yeah, at the bottom left there. So its feathers are really spread out on its wingtips. Habitat, they don't really breed in Pennsylvania, but they definitely use the ridge and valley regions to migrate in winter. They'll be and everything from the grasslands to the forest edge, even on top of the forest. Your best chance is probably going to see them in an open space though during the winter. Like the other eagles, they are protected by federal law. So it's always pretty exciting to see. There's always work going on for the conservation of the bald eagle, and Pennsylvania is pretty important for its wintering range. And then the next species, this is the American Kestrel, another species I think that people don't even realize that they're seeing on a daily basis. This is one of the birds I look for every time I go for a drive. It's a beautiful falcon species with really distinct markings. I don't have to really even go over the markings, they're pretty obvious. But what you want to look for, if you're not really, you don't have your binoculars or anything like that, they're pretty easy to spot in open fields. They're usually on wires next to fields, and they're bobbing their tail like crazy, like they're about to fall off the wire, but trying to catch their balance constantly. Or I see them also hovering in the fields. So they're a little bit unique because they hover like a helicopter above its prey before they dive down onto the prey. No other species of hawk that I can recall really does that, or falcon. So they're pretty easy to see and spot out just even from a distance. If you see something hovering in a field, it's probably an American Kestrel. There's a lot of, they really like open country, farmland, city, wood edges. They nest here in Pennsylvania, and they are cavity nesters. So they're always looking for woodpecker holes or squirrel nests that they can take over because they don't make their own cavities. That's why we have Kestrel boxes, as I think I have one behind me right now, for people to put up. Their population is doing okay, but there's still a decline, and that is because of how we manage our farmlands now. There's not as many farmlands, so a lot of farmlands are turning it back into forests, so that disrupts them. And also just pesticides in general used on farmland, since a lot of their prey are rodents. Any type of pesticide applied to a farm field and that kestrel eats that, it's obviously going to have an impact and a buildup of pesticides within the kestrel's body, so they can die of that poisoning. And the lack of people leaving dead cavity trees also kind of hurts them as well. And then next we have a lot of people's favorite. Everywhere I go, people tell me a ruby-throated hummingbird story. So I'd like to really talk about them and why they're important for, why Pennsylvania is an important place for them. They're pretty easy to ID. It's our only hummingbird in Pennsylvania. Occasionally we may get a stray migrant of a different species, but chances are if you see a hummingbird, it's gonna be the ruby-throated hummingbird. So somebody at the beginning of this field trip was saying how a hummingbird flew up right next to them, and I just kept on thinking, I wonder if she was wearing orange or red, because that's a great way to attract them. So I have a headband that I wear a lot, and I will have hummingbirds like dive bomb my head out in the field because they're so attracted to those bright colors, and they're not afraid of anything, so they'll come right up to you. So when you think of that little tiny hummingbird and you think that it can travel 900 miles nonstop over the Gulf, that's just an amazing journey, but it burns so many calories. So by the time it gets to Pennsylvania, it really, really needs to build up its fat reserves again. It's pretty much depleted. So it's usually going to go to, it could be anywhere from gardens, wood edges, in the forest itself. What's great about the hummingbird is though everybody can play a part in supporting it by planting native species. We're such an important stopover habitat, so any type of natives that you have in your yard or your garden or even your windowsill will play an important role of keeping the populations up.
That's a great segue, Katie. Kelly, was that you?
Nope, go ahead.
Okay, so that's a great segue into what you can do at home to support bird life, whether it's on the ridge or off the ridge through Audubon's Bird Friendly Communities program. We won't talk much about it today. You can find more information at pa.audubon.org, but it does have a Plants for Birds component, a Bird Friendly Buildings component, and a Home for Birds component. So we're happy to talk to anyone about the program after the call, or you can go straight to the website. So the last project I want to mention that we're doing on the Kittatinny Ridge is our return on environment work and our engagement of municipal officials. We've done 8 out of 12 county return on environment studies on the ridge. There are 12 counties on the ridge, and for 8 of them, we have conducted a return on environment study. And the study documents the economic value of the natural resources on the ridge. So for example, if a community has a forest, they don't have to invest so much in stormwater management or pollination. So that all has monetary value. So on the ridge, through these studies, we document the natural system services value of having these natural assets in place, their benefit for our health through clean air, clean water, what local recreation is worth, not tourism, but what is recreation worth in each of one of these counties? And how does open space impact real estate premiums? So on average, for each county, it's $1 billion annually in return on environment for each county. And so when we've completed the study, we will leave behind all kinds of materials for the county officials and our partners to share the results of the study. We'll produce a video, a summary report, a brochure, a PowerPoint, all kinds of materials, social media posts. If you're interested in this work, you can go to kittatinnyridge.org and look at the ROE studies which have been completed on our ROE page.
Jeannie, I hate to put you on the spot here, but do you know which of the 8 are completed? Which 8 counties?
Oh, you're gonna make me, I'm gonna miss, sure. Carbon, Northampton, Lehigh, Berks, Perry, Dauphin, Lebanon. I think that's what, 6 or 7.
That's 7.
Did I mention Dauphin, Perry, and Cumberland? I don't know if I mentioned Cumberland.
I don't think you said Cumberland.
Yeah, Cumberland.
All right.
Okay, so we can also take the results of the study, the data, and map them so that our communities can start to treat natural resources like assets and manage them and help strategize their conservation efforts. So for example, on the map you see on the left, these are the return on environment results for a county, Lebanon. And the highest value return on environment is always around the wet features, like a wetland or stream corridors. They always have the highest return on environment value, followed by the forest. So we can map all that and you can see where your highest return is in your county. We've also done some for townships. On the right side on the bottom, I've picked out 2 pie charts from the Lebanon County study. The first pie chart on the left shows the $309.8 million in annual savings for natural system services in Lebanon County. So almost $304 million per year in natural system services savings because nature's doing its job for free. On the right, the revenue from outdoor recreation is $183.9 million per year. Again, all of these graphs and tables and information is in all of the ROE studies. And I mentioned you can use return on environment conclusions to strategize. You can treat them as assets to be managed. Also, we get support for these studies from those on the left and those on the right on the political spectrum. It helps to prioritize what to protect first, what to restore first. And there are multiple uses. The ROE data can help rationalize open space funding. You can align zoning, your zoning ordinance with the highest value ROE and see if you might need to tweak your ordinances. And it serves as a framework for municipal outreach. So on the map, for example, the land cover map is on the bottom, which is really on the ground. And then we overlay that with our return on environment results. So you'll see in the bright green and the land that's been protected, the parks, the trails, and we can, if we turn on those ROE results, we can start to see connectivity within the township, places that might need to be restored or places that you would want to protect first. So it helps you protect what you have and learn how to connect all of it together and restore it. Also on this map, we turned on the homeowners associations. So we can see concentrations of homeowners that we could reach out to effectively.
All right, so for our last group of birds, we're going to be doing riparian areas and wetlands. The first species I have here is the Louisiana water thrush. It's often overlooked because it's just a gray drab looking bird, but easy to ID just because it has that great eyebrow and a really pointy beak that it uses to forage with. It will stab the insect prey or crayfish that it will eat. It will often be found next to like fast moving streams in wooded areas. What makes this species really interesting is that we use it a lot for studies because it's a great indicator species. It's really pollution sensitive. So if there's pollution in a stream and the insects that it depends on are diminished, it won't do well and it probably won't be there. So a little bit of guidance for you if you're backpacking and you're looking for water. If you're listening, or if you happen to notice a Louisiana water thrush next to a water source, chances are that water's pretty clean and safe to drink. So that's what I do when I'm backpacking. So I don't know if that would help any of you out. Nests can be found on the ground and roots and logs. So their nests are really easy to find as well. So that's another reason it makes it a great species to study. Its populations are doing okay, but it's like they're actually doing better. They're one of the few species that are doing better than since the 70s, since people like Trouts Unlimited, groups like Trouts Unlimited and Audubon, and a lot of water conservation groups have cleaned up a lot of the streams in Pennsylvania. So you're most likely going to find this at the bottom area of the ridge and just about any mountain in Pennsylvania or any ridgeline in Pennsylvania. So that's the Louisiana water thrush. I didn't put the song on because it's really one of those just jabbly, just funny songs that doesn't sound like anything, so they're really hard to ID. The next species I put up is the Acadian Flycatcher, which is this cute little lovely bird that also lives next to streams and forest. They can be pretty hard to ID by sight only because there's like 4 different flycatchers that look almost the exact same as the Acadian flycatcher. So unless you get a really good look at it and you can say, oh, it has a nice ring around its eye, you're mostly going to be able to ID this by sound. So I did include a song for this one because it's pretty easy. It's that short pizza. I don't know if you heard that in the beginning, but it says pizza very distinctly, and I always remembered it because I know it's Acadian flycatcher, but I always think of arcade, and arcade has pizza. So that's the trick that I learned with that one. It really needs mature forests and a healthy riparian area, but it can be outside of the woodlands too. Occasionally it'll be in more populated areas with some development, but nest success will go down if it's in an unfragmented area. And I think we just have one more species. This is the northern harrier. It's North America's only harrier. I was unsure if I wanted to add this at first, but the more I read about the northern harrier, the more I began to fall in love with it. I've seen them before, but I mainly work in forests, so it's not a bird that I was super familiar with until a couple of days ago when Kelly asked me to do this. It's a slender, medium-sized raptor with long, fairly broad wings and a long, round tail. They have, what makes them really neat is that disc they have around their face, so it's almost owl-like, and a really sharp hooked bill. Now that disc is there because they're one of the few species of hawks, and I think maybe the only species of hawk in North America that hunts purely by sound. So most hawks and other raptors or bird of prey will hunt by sight, but the harrier will actually use its sense of hearing to hunt. So that disc, just like in owls, helps funnel sound to their ear. They don't usually soar high above they don't really soar high above up in the sky. They're usually really low. So if you see a hawk flying pretty low looking for prey, it's probably most likely the harrier. And another really easy way to ID it is it has a big white rump. It's so noticeable when, as soon as it banks a corner and you see that white rump, you're gonna know it's a northern harrier. The harrier has been declining since the 60s with a 47% decline. This is mainly due to pesticide buildup and habitat loss. So it likes wetlands and marsh areas and a lot of grassy fields, kind of similar to what the kestrel uses. It comes through it doesn't breed in Pennsylvania, but it migrates through and it winters here. Things like monotypic agriculture, fields growing to forest, wetlands being drained for development, and mowing when it's breeding because it nests on the ground has all pretty much been the reasons why it's declining so heavily. So here in Pennsylvania, what we can do to keep the habitat it needs for the winter is try to reduce pesticides, try to reduce, try to mow fields when they're not breeding, which is all the time here in Pennsylvania, but keeping some type of cover on the ground during the winter for rodents and other type of prey it might hunt will also improve its habitat. It's mainly going to be found near the ridge and east in Pennsylvania. We do have some out on the western side of Pennsylvania, but it seems to is spotted more in that area. So it's really, really going to be found along the ridge line, especially during migration. And I think that's all the birds.
One thing I wanted to mention is on our Kittatinny Ridge Facebook page, every Monday we have a Kittatinny creature feature, we call them. And so we will feature wildlife from the Pennsylvania Wildlife Action Plan. So it's just something to look forward to on Mondays if you want to learn about different species in the Wildlife Action Plan. We have a lot of fun with those. And we'd like to thank you for joining us today. Katie and I would like to thank you, Kelly. Thank you for having us. We hope you learned how important the Kittatinny Ridge is to Pennsylvania as a conservation landscape, as Pennsylvania's most resilient, climate resilient landscape. Katie went through so many beautiful birds that you can find on the ridge at any one of those, hawk watches, plenty of places to bird watch. Also, it's a really critical connector between landscapes. It's a recreational asset with the Appalachian Trail and other activities. It's an economic asset, as we are demonstrating with our return on environment studies. And overall, it's really important for Pennsylvania and beyond our quality of life. It's a real asset that we are really pleased that we get to work on conserving.
So with that, thank you, Jeannie. Thank you, Katie. That was excellent.
Thank you, Kelly, for having us on. And if anybody has any questions, I'm always happy to talk about birds. So you can go ahead and put them in the chat, or I don't know, Kelly, if you shared my email, but it's fine if you do.
I certainly will. I have a quick question about the kestrel. Why does it do the bobbing with its tail?
I have no idea. It's not the only species that like completely bobs like that. I don't know why it does it. I just know it makes it really easy to spot if I'm driving down the road. It literally looks like it's going to fall off the wire at any moment. It just like catches itself. And the Louisiana water thrush, I forgot to mention, also bobs a lot, so that makes it really easy to spot. It looks like its legs are just buckling every 2 seconds.
So Katie and Jeanne, Alice is asking for a few good locations or your favorite locations along the ridge for birding. Any hot spots you want to give a shout out to?
There's so many. I mean, aside from Hawk Mountain, which is always really exciting to go to, Lehigh Gap Nature Center. It was a super fun site that has been restored into a nature center. I think the first one ever. So that is in Carbon County. So that's a great place, Lehigh Gap Nature Center.
So Jeannie is going to be able to point you in better places than I could, because I'm usually in the northern part of Pennsylvania, and I grew up in the western part of Pennsylvania. So I've only been to the Hawkwatch areas. And that was a very long time ago. So I can't really pinpoint you to any specific area that I go out there.
And partners, a lot of our partners have bird walks and activities that you might be interested in. And Kelly, you know Wagner's Gap.
I do. I was also going to say that Hawk Rock in Duncannon, which is a short hike along the AT, is a great spot. You can watch from the rock itself as you're overlooking the river, or you can duck back along the trail into the forest and get some great sightings back in there. And my second one for the day is Wind Gap, tiny little town along the AT, a great little town, very warm, very friendly. And right where the highway cuts through, the AT comes up on either side, and you're just immediately in the forest and almost like you're in another place because you get there so quickly. And that's another fantastic place to get to quickly, get into the deep into the forest quickly, and be able to hear lots of things.
And we do have that slide of hawk watches if anybody wants that slide.
Jeannie, I think you have the answer to this one. Bill's asking if you have eBird lists.
We do have a Kittatinny Ridge eBird list, yes. Yes, please feel free to share your list. You should be able to find it.
Katie, this one I think is for you. Carol's asking if birds are tested for what pesticides are accumulating in their bodies.
Usually if we find them dead, they'll collect them and they'll do what's it called? Not an autopsy. They'll test them then to see if there's accumulation of pesticides. Some species, like the eagles mainly, they'll test for lead, because that's another problem with eagles is lead buildup in their blood, because they're eating like deer that have been shot a lot. So it's sad.
So Kate, go ahead, Kelly.
Katie, your rock star moment of the week. Are you ready for this? Bill would like to know if you have an eBird list.
I did respond to that. I do have an eBird list. I do it sometimes, but I do so many studies or surveys for universities in the DCNR, usually this time of year, that I get really lazy and I'm like, well, I've already made a list. I'm not going to upload it to eBird. But this year is a little different just because of the lockdown. I'm not really doing surveys for anybody this year, so I probably should start uploading my list a little bit more into eBird.
And Katie, I was fascinated to learn that a bird on one side of the state might sound different than a bird on the other side of the state. It's fascinating.
Yeah, just in case you're wondering what Jeannie's talking about, I was telling them where they can find bird songs, and I use this great website called Xenocanto when I'm trying to ID birds or look for songs to include in presentations. And I use that site because it tells you where it's recorded, because some birds sound different depending on where you are in the country. So a meadowlark here will sound different than a meadowlark in West Virginia, and I like to try to get it as close as possible.
Interesting.
Yeah, I can post that site.
Super.
Another little factoid that Kelly likes me to talk about, and I think I forgot, is that a lot of birds, even though I describe their breeding habitat in a lot of the situations, like the wood thrush and the cerulean, and it's mature forest, they also do what we like to call patch trading. which means that once they fledge the nest, they'll go to young, early successional type forest. So you need like a whole bunch of different mix of forest ages and classes on the landscape to suit the needs of the bird throughout its breeding season, even after it fledges the nest. So that's why the places that have large forest tract like the ridge are really important to a lot of these species, because they need more than just their nesting site. They need stuff to provide them with the calories they're going to need for a big migration coming up. And usually that's the opposite of where they nest.
Katie, can you just do a nutshell overview of the Healthy Forest Initiative and why, specifically for Pennsylvania with our single-aged forest, a little bit about the work you're doing?
Sure. So what I usually do with the Healthy Forest Initiative, we've picked out landscapes in Pennsylvania. Most of them are in the PA wilds up north, the Allegheny Highlands. And we work with different partners to create habitat for a lot of these species on a very large landscape scale. So I'm working with industrial forests like lime timber and public forests like the Allegheny National Forest and a lot of game lands to create the habitat needs for all these species, because it really depends on what the landscape is. Like I was just saying with the patch trading. So usually birds don't recognize boundaries. So we work with these partners that are all pretty close to each other in proximity to create certain habitat needs based off of their type of timber management goals that they're doing. Like for an industrial forest, they're mainly producing timber to be harvested later in the future. So we can help them include in their plans certain activities that they can do that will help bird species. And other areas like the Allegheny National Forest is just full of mature forest. So we help them do a little bit of management. We also work with private landowners. So if you or anybody else that are located in the northern section of Pennsylvania have large forest tracts over 50 acres, we try to connect you with a forester who's trained in bird-friendly forestry. We can look at your management plan and give you suggestions on what you can do to improve your forests. And at the same time, we try to connect you with other partners that may have other cost share programs out there, or provides technical services. So places like the NRCS actually gives you a cost share. It helps you pay for some of the management that you are doing on your property. A lot of it requires you to spend money. Some of it you can actually make a profit, because if you're doing a timber harvest, you'll get your money back. But other things like controlling invasive species usually cost landowners a lot of money. So we try to find them resources that they can use. So that's basically what we're doing in the northern part of the state right now, but hopefully this will go statewide eventually. We're just about a year and a half into the program. We have a couple focal species that we really hone in on to create their habitat. They're all umbrella species, which means that they provide habitat for a whole bunch of other species. If we create habitat for a wood thrush, we're actually helping 25 other species thrive. So was there a second part of that question I'm missing?
You nailed it. Thank you.
Okay. It's a lot of information. It's very exciting work. So.
And if you'd like more information on the Healthy Forest Initiative, you can go to pa.audubon.org. Either look for Healthy Forests or Working Lands. You can find it in both places. More information on the Kittatinny Ridge is available at kittatinnyridge.org. I would highly recommend that you take a look at the ROE pages. I mean, it really is fascinating that you can put a number. So people so often say that you can't put a number on the natural resources, and it turns out you can. It's really an incredible way to guide work around conservation in municipalities. And then also make sure you check out the Kittatinny Ridge Landscape Conservation Landscape on Facebook, so you can see the Monday creature features. So Jeanne, Katie, thank you so much for doing this today. I know I learned a ton. Thanks everybody for coming out. And if there are no more questions, we're going to sign off for today. And we'll see you next week with Appalachian Audubon Society at their Trout Run Nature Preserve.
Kelly.
Thank you, Kelly.
Thanks, everybody.
Kelly, you remember the blue Ink Warbler, right?
I'm kind of in love with the pizza bird now, too.
Okay. All right. I hope I helped you.